This is a real threat to society, I think. It's a threat to the continuation of an informed electorate, which I don't think we have now. I don't know if we ever did, but we certainly do not have an informed electorate now because the information is just not being communicated to people as it should. And I throw into this, Andrew, also the great decline in television news in Alaska, which is just about as striking as with newspapers. Public radio is hanging on, but I don't know what the future is there either because of the federal cutback. Mm-hmm. And it's a bleak situation in many ways, but there are voices that can be heard. They're just not being heard.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Dermot Cole, longtime newspaper reporter, columnist, and author. He started at the Fairbanks Daily News Miner in the late 70s while he was still a student at UAF. He stayed with that paper until 2013 when he became a columnist at the Alaska Dispatch, which was originally an online news blog funded by Alice Rogoff, the former CFO of U.S. News & World Report. In 2014, Rogoff purchased the Anchorage Daily News and merged it with the Alaska Dispatch. Dermot stayed on as a columnist until 2017 when the ADN declared bankruptcy and was sold to the Binkley family. Dermot was let go, and shortly afterwards started his own blog, which continues to this day, called Reporting from Alaska. He's the author of 6 books, including North to the Future, The Alaska Story, 1959 to 2009.
Dermot Cole, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I'm glad you're in Fairbanks.
Happy to be in Fairbanks. Where did you grow up?
All right. I came from a rather large family of 6. I had 6 brothers and sisters in eastern Pennsylvania. And my oldest brother, Pat Cole.
Like the Poconos?
Near the Poconos. It's funny you mentioned the Poconos because my wife, who is from eastern Washington, thinks of the Cascades as mountains, and she always makes fun of the Poconos as being
hills, glorified hills.
Yeah, just domes, not mountains. But anyway, yeah. Eastern Pennsylvania, about 60 miles from Philadelphia.
Okay.
And on a farm. My dad and mom left New York in the mid-40s and moved to middle of nowhere in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And my oldest brother, Pat Cole, became an attorney. Actually, he was the first one who came here from my family. And that's because he got mugged in Philadelphia when he was going to college. And he
needed to get someplace far away to be safe.
Exactly. And he started going through college catalogs. And he got past Alabama, but he didn't get past Alaska. So he came here and went to UAF in 1970. And my twin brother, Terrence Cole, came with him. I was sick at the time. I had rheumatic fever. And so I didn't make that trip with him, but the two of them came up here in 1970. And at the time I was in high school. And I think that gave my twin brother the idea that eventually he'd want to move up here too. And he did 3 years later. So my twin brother then, Terrence, lived in Fairbanks. My older brother, Pat, lived in Fairbanks.
And Pat was an attorney?
Yeah. Actually, he wasn't an attorney then, but he eventually became one.
What did Terrence do?
He was a history professor here. They were both students at UAF, as I was. And my sister Maureen became a student here, and my sister Sheila. They all,
So
all went.
Pat really led all the siblings.
Yes. Yeah. There. And so he got a degree from UAF in speech and then went to law school in Moscow, Idaho, and came back and had a long career here in local government, both working for the borough and for the city of Fairbanks. And he really enjoyed the administrative work, helping local government perform its functions. And then my twin brother, Terrence, became a history professor at the university. They both passed away now, Pat in 2013 and my brother Terrence in 2020. But I stayed here with my family, with my wife, who is also a former journalist. And we had 3 kids that are now 2 of them in Anchorage and 1 in Washington, D.C. And in the meantime, I worked for the News Miner here for about 37 years.
Tell me about...
And then I worked about 10 more years, and that's my life.
And you're still working. How did you get interested in journalism?
The Watergate era, I was really interested in... It was a book by Gay Talese called The Kingdom and the Power that really first got me interested in it. That was a history of the New York Times. And so I thought, wow, I couldn't figure out what else to major in. I had tried engineering, but a D in calculus doesn't help.
Right.
So I didn't do very well in math. And so journalism really appealed to me, and writing. And so I began working at that, and I'm still trying to get better. So it's been really something I've enjoyed doing. I worked as an editor and a reporter, columnist for a long time, and it mainly about Fairbanks stuff, but also statewide politics and several books about Alaska history.
Did you start working at the Newsletter while you were still in college?
Yes, yeah. I started work at the Newsletter in 1976, and I just about finished college by then. I met my wife here, and we really
And was she working at the Newsletter as well?
Yeah.
So you were both working there.
Yeah.
I guess tell us about the News Miner in the late 70s, because to me now in 2025, I think of it as a pretty small paper.
Yeah, like the rest of the newspaper business, it's been a tailspin. The decline of the newspaper business, as in many other things, it took a longer time to get here than elsewhere. And that's mainly because the killing blows were the invention of Craigslist, which really did away with classified advertising, and the 2008-2009 financial collapse, which really did a lot to destroy national retail advertising, at least in terms of newspapers. All of that effort migrated to a handful of big, gigantic tech companies, and the wreckage of the American newspaper, not just American, but worldwide, the newspapers then left behind, staffed with people that are trying to do the best they can, but their resources are woefully limited, and it's just declining by the day because there's no economic foundation in advertising anymore. And people are not used to paying enough in subscriptions to help pay the bills. So in Alaska, we're really hurting in that regard. I don't know about the financial future of our remaining newspapers. They're all in severe risk, I think.
It's interesting when I think about this media series that I'm doing, because the first person that I interviewed was Tom Hewitt, who, of course, was at the ADM, but has moved back to Fairbanks and is a Fairbanks born and raised kid. James Brooks got his start in Alaska working for the Daily News Miner. I interviewed Ryan Binkley from Fairbanks, who owns the ADN, who has a little different take. I recognize that, of course, he has to paint it in a positive light, that there is a future, that things are going to work out, that the ADN is going to succeed, that the ADN is going to shine through the chaos all around it.
Yeah, I might just interject one thing here, that he comes from a family of people who prospered by being optimists. And it certainly took great optimism on the part of his grandparents to start the riverboat discovery into it's really the best tourist enterprise in Fairbanks, and has been that way for many years. It's really a world-class operation. But that only came about because Jim and Mary Binkley were just like eternal optimists, and they built it. I'm not sure if the optimism about the newspaper today, it's probably necessary to believe in it if you own it, but the signs don't look too good because there is no advertising, and print publication is going away.
Right.
Eventually. The Fairbanks paper is in a different situation because it's owned by the nonprofit Sneddon Foundation. Mm-hmm. What happened in essence is that the newspaper was sold in the early 1990s to Dean Singleton and Richard Scudder. Singleton was young, Scudder was old. They were building up a newspaper empire across the United States. And they bought the News Miner, but didn't make it part of their chain, which was the Media News Group. They kept it. They owned it separately. That was one of the conditions of the sale, because C.W. Sneddon, who had owned the paper since 1950, and that by the time it was sold, he was dead, and it was his estate, really. But he hated chain ownership of newspapers. And So I think to somewhat appease or to deal with that level of real animosity, they set up this situation so that the newspaper was not owned by the Singleton and Scudder chain, but by a separate entity in their businesses. And I think they did really well until the financial collapse. And at that time, that's when the Singletons, he was then the publisher of the Denver Post, and that was the main newspaper in their operation. And that really collapsed with the financial collapse. Because again, newspaper advertising just evaporated. And after that, he eventually sold the News Monitor for a small amount. I don't know exactly how much it was, a relatively small amount. And the Sneddon Foundation, which was really financed with assets from the original sale of the paper, bought it back. And it's a really good thing for Alaska that the paper continues to be in existence, publishing 6 days a week. The people who work there, it's certainly a much smaller staff. There's a handful of reporters.
And they also own the Kodiak Mirror, which
Yes.
is still doing 5 days a week.
I am not sure, but I think so. But there's just no future in this, in these print publications. And I don't really know what the answer is. Most of the newspaper subscribers also, this is a big problem. They're old people. They're like me.
So I wasn't finished saying all the people from Fairbanks that I've interviewed from this.
Yeah.
I also interviewed Dan O'Neill.
Yeah.
And that is really who I learned the history of the Fairbanks Daily News Monitor from. And you might have a different perspective, which would be great. But he has written a lot about the very conservative take that the News Monitor has had for decades. And when he writes about Project Chariot and the way that the News Monitor was basically a mouthpiece for the military industrial complex, for the business community, that we are going to bring this to Alaska no matter what, and that he's felt that's persistent, and it's been this just persistent, overtly conservative angle.
I know that's his view on this, and I agree with him to some extent, but I see more gray in the situation than he does. But he's certainly right about the unblinking endorsement of just about anything that comes down the pike. That's really been the history. The Anchorage Times was pretty much the same way. The Anchorage Daily News, on the other hand, tended to be skeptical. And I think in most of the years that I worked at the News Monitor, let me think about how I can answer this. The people working there were not going around every day thinking how they could skew reality to please the publisher. Generally, they did the best they could. But it is easy, though, to find examples to back up Dan's point of view, because this is a human enterprise. And although the staff was much larger at the time, still the workload was ridiculous. And
interesting.
And there's no time to think. And that's maybe the one area where I would disagree with him the most, is that a lot of errors happen just because people were in a hurry. And the person who reads the article at home or reads the newspaper at home may, in many cases, be spending far more time with that than the editor did who wrote the headline and put it on the page. And that's part of having a small staff and trying to things together. And I likened it, and I still, at the time, and I still do, to a kind of shoveling operation, just shoveling stuff onto the page to get it out the door.
Fill it out.
But the bigger story now is whether or not the paper's going to survive.
I want to go back to the 70s and when you first started.
Yeah.
And when you just said that it was still, even with more people, it was like a insurmountable workload. I guess it's because it was like a daily newspaper. But here's the thing. And I asked this question of James Brooks about his work at the Kodiak Daily Mirror. Yeah. I said, how did you have enough news to do a daily paper in Kodiak? And this is just me speaking from my Anchorage perspective. I feel the same way about Fairbanks. It's not a huge city.
Yeah.
Having a lot of reporters doing several stories a week, it seems like that, I don't know, some of those stories may not have been newsworthy.
That happens every day. Really. Honestly, it's not today's installment of War and Peace. It's just, you do what you can to fill the space. And generally, the people who worked here were fairly inexperienced. This was an early job, and the idea was to go on to do bigger and better things. Now, in my case, I didn't go on to do bigger and better things. I just stayed here.
You stayed here.
Because I liked Fairbanks. It was a great place to raise kids. And I liked the work. I did. I enjoyed it a lot. The
70s was the pipeline. So it was the pipeline. There was a lot of money here. It was a different.
Yeah. The newspaper thrived, I would say, in the 1970s and 80s in particular. And it went to 7-day-a-week publication in 1984, I think it was. And it did really well as long as retail advertising remained a solid foundation and classified advertising. And now the reporters working here are really doing too many stories per day, I think. And
Because there's too few of them.
there's too few of them. They still have to fill the paper up. And there's just not enough time to do it well. They are fairly inexperienced, but I do notice over time that people get better. They certainly do. And reporters working here now, several of them, 2 or 3 in particular, have been here long enough. They started really as green people, but they're now, I think, really doing pretty well. And I'd like to see that. But we have a problem here that their subscribers are all old. Young people are not subscribed to the paper. They think they get the news they need from TikTok.
Yeah.
And they're not getting it. And this is a real threat to society, I think. It's a threat to the continuation of an informed electorate, which I don't think we have now. I don't know if we ever did, but we certainly do not have an informed electorate now because the information is just not being communicated to people as it should. And I throw into this, Andrew, also the great decline in television news in Alaska, which is just about as striking as with newspapers. Public radio is hanging on, but I don't know what the future is there either because of the federal cutback. And it's a bleak situation in many ways, but there are voices that can be heard. They're just not being heard.
One thing that James Brooks pointed out was how little attention mainstream newspapers get on social media. The Haitian posts its stories. They don't get a jillion likes. They don't get retweeted. They don't get shared that frequently. And I think that kind of shines a light on that a lot of times the news is not entertaining. And it probably shouldn't be. But when people want to always be entertained,
that's a good point. To me, that's the wrong standard too. Entertaining is a good word. But I don't know that the people who have worked in newspapers over the years and who given their life to this type of work
thought of themselves as entertainers.
To a degree, they recognize that part of what they do is entertainment, but that's only a small part of it. Their mission, the mission that they've given themselves is to inform people. And that involves entertainment sometimes, maybe lecturing, being strident at other times, and communicating what they think is important. And that's not the same as entertaining. And I do worry about how we have all these isolated voices. And then people who are not, I think, following the standards in which, I'm not sure how to say this, but
I do.
Yeah. For instance, Must Read Alaska.
Yes.
Must Read Alaska is designed to attack people who don't agree with Suzanne Downing and John Faulkner and whoever else is in the group of that enterprise. There's
no journalistic principles being followed. There's no forcing.
And I know you've had this personal experience yourself.
I have, but so has everybody.
Yeah.
And did you know her? Did you know Suzanne Downing?
No.
You never did?
No.
She worked at the Juneau Empire. She had a past as a journalist. She was married to Pat Yak.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is interesting is that it wasn't somebody who didn't know how to be a journalist, and therefore there's just these massive lapses in what should have been done. It's somebody who absolutely knew what was supposed to be done and consciously decided not to do them.
Yeah. I agree with that. And she lets her own views, her own opinions dictate. Look, I let my own, what I do is analysis and commentary largely. I don't have a boss. I don't have a job. I consider this sort of my hobby because I'm really interested in these things. I don't go out of my way to bug people for money. I never have done that. And I never do marketing. So I do have a little blurb at the bottom of each column saying, if you want to help, here's that money in. But that's all I'm ever going to do because I like doing this work. And I know it rubs many people the wrong way, but it's my opinion. And I do not distort the facts. I do the best I can to present what I think is the truth.
You do a really good job of bringing attention to facts and issues that may have been recently forgotten or recently passed over or recently not paid appropriate amount of attention to. I think just an example on the most recent articles talking about Trag Taylor and why is no one reporting on this about his basically kowtowing to David Haig?
Yeah, I really don't understand that. It's not a smart political thing either, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure what, but I think it concerns me this week is why is he still, he's Attorney General as we're still here, but he's heading this national organization that's bringing its meeting to Anchorage.
Yes.
And there's real questions about all the way that operation works in terms of who it's allied with for private companies that want something out of the top law enforcement officials from people across the United States. And I'm concerned, one question I have today, is this how you line up campaign contributions to begin your campaign for governor in a few weeks?
Mm-hmm.
That's a legitimate question. And if we had really a healthy journalistic situation in Alaska, that question would be asked and answered. But we don't. We just don't have that anymore. We do need to find solutions here. There are people doing good work. Nat Hertz does a pretty good work. The Alaska Beacon has a lot of potential. I would like the Alaska Beacon to be more aggressive and more pointed in its coverage, and not just he said, she said. That there's way too much of that. But it's certainly good material. It's filling a void left by the near disappearance of the Associated Press, which doesn't really do anything anymore in Alaska.
We had Becky Boyer.
Yeah, and because of the reduction in the number of members to the AP co-op, the work of the two remaining AP people, Alaska, one in Anchorage, one in Juneau, was directed outside. It started to Hawaii and other places. So anyway, with the AP's decline, it's a big loss, but it's just another one in this series of losses. The Beacon has somewhat filled into that, but we really don't need just simple press conference coverage. We need more than that. Now, Matt Buxton is doing some good analysis. I like that. There has to be some way of trying to almost to recreate the newspaper experience.
But it's so tricky. I need to read your blog, that I need to go see what Matt Buxton's done, that I need to go see what Nat Hers is, and I have to go to these different places. It would be nice if there was a way to put all that in one thing.
And that is, I think, a challenge for younger people. I would like to see Nat, for instance, trying to work out something like this. And
it would be epic.
Yeah.
It would be awesome. Yeah. And the other thing is that, because the truth is sometimes I don't go to all the different sites.
Yeah.
And so I am prejudiced by the one site that I had time to go to. And only one person can only cover so much.
Yeah.
So I might, if I only go to one blog and I see the story for that day, I might be missing 3 important stories.
That is certainly true. And I want to say here, when I first started doing this blog, which is in 2017, my original motivation was I had been laid off when the Binkleys bought the Daily News out of bankruptcy. Yeah.
So I want to go back you and your wife were both working at the Daily News Miner back in the 70s. And what was your beat? What was her beat?
Let's see. She originally was working in the composing room, but then I convinced her to go back to college, and she did the police beat. And then for a while, she did feature stories, and ended up, when she had kids, she went part-time and mainly did book reviews for quite a while. And then
And what were you doing?
I did all sorts of things. I began covering sports.
So you started off with sports and then just did everything else.
Yeah.
What I
Local
gotta,
government.
what I got to point out though is that
Yeah.
like this, I feel like that two journalists meeting at a newspaper and then getting married and raising three children together, while both of them continue to work. One is a part-time journalist and the other is
Yeah.
full-time. Like no one can do that anymore
Yeah.
because there's just not enough money there. But you
Oh,
guys
well,
felt like you were
well,
able to make it.
Well, there wasn't a lot of money there either. But we made it. We made it work. We've been married for 45 years, so
It's working
kind of
so
okay.
far.
So far, yeah. And these were not people that were highly paid there, honestly. And but by the way, I hate people who say honestly.
Oh, I know.
Because when people say that, it usually means they're not telling the truth.
When I interviewed Les Guerra and Amanda Mativier about the OCS audit,
Yeah.
Les Guerra kept saying over and over again that you can't pay someone $26 an hour to do this incredibly difficult job and expect them to stay. But, and I even said it and I cut it out of the interview. I said, Les, everything is relative. Larry personally lost $52,000 last year because he decided to pay a journalist full-time $52,000 for the year, which he felt was good money. $26 an hour, about $52,000 a year. So what we're considering a really good pay for a journalist, you're saying is not enough money for somebody who didn't have a college degree to take this state job that they saw on a website.
Yes. That'd be a really good point for discussion, because $26 an hour, I think, is probably more than many
Journalists
are making right now, at least at the smaller papers that survive. And in many cases, there's a history of this, is the organization acted as if it was doing you a favor to hire you. But still, the child enforcement cases, to me, that is a much more difficult job in terms of the daily stresses.
Oh, 100%. It's a terrible job.
And we haven't paid those people enough, I think. And it's not that it's an easy job to be a reporter. It's not. It's a difficult job. But the personal stresses involved, like in journalism, you don't usually have that.
Although journalism hasn't stress. I've watched
Certainly
the governor scream at journalists. I've watched.
Certainly. But it's not the same thing as maybe.
Oh, and Trump
somebody
for sure screams at journalists, calls them stupid.
Yes. Yeah. And that's getting worse. I would say that's worse. But it's just a different category of harassment. But anyway, that's an interesting topic by itself, really.
So you guys raised your three kids. You stayed at the News Miner. You wrote books in the 80s. So
yeah, first book I wrote came out in 1986. It was a short biography of a Bush pilot.
How did that book come about?
My twin brother Terrence suggested it, because he was at the time working for Alaska Northwest Publishing in Seattle. And Frank Barr had been a friend of Bob Henning, who was the owner of that company. And he wanted to publish a biography of him. So he said, hey, we have this book that Archie Satterfield, who was a Seattle area author, had started but couldn't finish. And he suggested I do it. Anyway, I've got a lot of really good ideas over the years from my brother, who was always telling me what to do. Mm-hmm. And at least some of the time it was really good ideas that he gave me. But he gave me that idea. He also gave me the idea for my second book, which was a history of the 1908 auto race from New York to Paris, which is something I really enjoyed doing. I had a year where I was a Michigan journalism fellow at the University of Michigan, and I worked on that. Then we came back here. I did work for the Associated Press in Seattle for a year, but I really didn't like working the overnight shift. And we had kids that were small all the time. And so I came back to Fairbanks after a year and stayed here, really. And I stuck it out at the News Miner. And it always seemed different to me, even though maybe people reading my stuff might thought I was doing the same story over and over again. But it never seemed that way to me. And I always enjoyed talking to people and writing things. I got more into covering politics in the late 1990s.
When did you write your book on the pipeline?
I wrote that in the late 1990s as well. That was to come out with the 20th anniversary of the pipeline. So I think it was 97. And that was a social history of the pipeline. And I spent about a year on that and tried to convey some of the atmosphere of what it was like in Alaska at the time the pipeline is being built. That was the goal of that
Did
book.
you take time off work when you were doing all these books?
No. And
You kept reporting?
Yeah, for some reason, I always set up the schedule this way to either work on it for 2 hours in the morning or for 2 hours at night. So on some books, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to work for a couple of hours before going to the newspaper. And then on other books, I had shifted around and worked until midnight or 1 a.m. So it depended on what sort of habit I wanted to get into at the time. And
did you feel like one worked better than the other?
I didn't enjoy either experience. It would have been a lot nicer to not have to go to another job, but I just felt compelled to do this. I thought, gee, I had to have some accomplishments to my name other than what I'm doing in the newspaper. So that's what drove me. And it was fun getting them done, to put it that way. I enjoy researching things, and I enjoy having completed research projects. So that's what I get the most fun out of, really, is researching things. And so the books were just a sidelight. I never really, it wasn't.
You weren't doing it for money.
Oh, no, it wasn't very lucrative. Let me say that, because it's just really hard to make money selling books that have a fairly small audience that they're aimed at. But it was good. They were very good experiences, and I'm glad I did it. And I somehow managed to spend a lot of time with my kids. And that was really important to me.
So I want to just touch on when you said that you felt like you had to keep being a reporter. Did you feel like it was mission-driven work?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love doing it. This is how I define myself. And what I enjoyed doing the most was learning about something and then writing about it. And I felt that's the only thing I was really ever good at. And it was fun. So that's why I still do it. Do it today. I have, I would say, a small but devoted following. And I get about, I don't know, it's hard to say exactly how many. I have 1,200 people who get my email every morning. And then probably the 2,000 or 3,000 people read it.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
That's great.
Yeah. I would like to have a much larger audience, but that's not how I want to spend my time. Because I'm not a salesman. I'm just not.
When I had Dan O'Neill on, he talked about what he felt at the time that I was interviewing him was the Trump-Putin day. And he was saying that in the olden days, there would be a lot more coverage happening. That he felt like it was...
You mean in Alaska?
In Alaska. Yeah. Alaskans would be covering it. And what was interesting is I felt like you did it. You really did do...
Except it was afterwards, and it was...
But you still did stories. I guess what I'm saying is, in a way, you compensated because you did maybe four stories about the Trump-Putin meeting. And I thought Dermot's doing his part.
Andrew, but he's right. He's right. When the Anchorage Daily News was really healthy, and the Anchorage Times was really healthy, and Channel 2 was a
functioning news channel,
thriving news organization, that would have been really blanket coverage, really. And that certainly didn't happen when the Pope John Paul II, when he came to Fairbanks to meet Ronald Reagan in 1984. We spent months writing stories about this, and it was a really big event, not just at the newspaper, but for this entire community. It was one of the biggest days in the history of Fairbanks, which cynics called it the Pope Mises dope. But Reagan had a lot of followers here, and he was received warmly for the most part. We had dozens of stories the day before, the day it happened. And
dare I say that Trump and Putin are different than Reagan and Pope John Paul II?
That's exactly correct. And also we had the advantage with that. That was planned. This was, in essence, impromptu is one word, maybe chaotic and I'd say pointless refueling stop. Because it's not going to be remembered in history at all, because I think nothing was accomplished because of the lack of preparation and the lack of commitment. There was no, I think it was largely one of the many distractions to try to change the subject from Jeffrey Epstein. And that's still going on. There's a new thing every day. Today it's alleging that somebody who burns the flag is going to go to jail.
I feel like in the first Trump administration, I had Trump fatigue. I feel like we're on a whole new level, and I feel like I can't be outraged anymore.
Yeah.
But I just saw on the bus ride home from Poker Flat that Trump kept referring to Kim Jong-un, to the president of South Korea that he met with today, and kept saying that he could arrange a meeting and that he...
Well, the two of them were both... Actually, I wrote about that this afternoon.
Oh, good. I haven't checked it out yet.
It doesn't deal with that as much as Trump was referring to Alaska oil that's going to be exported. And I'm saying twice he said Alaska oil.
Right.
Not
Natural gas.
Yeah. So it's...
But that's him not knowing the right words, probably. And
to me, a sign of mental deterioration. And anyway, I thought it was worth writing about this Alaska part and a big harangue about solar panels. It's almost incoherent. So it's certainly not logical and well thought out. So going back to this Anchorage meeting, it was certainly not well thought out.
So I want to go back to you. You wrote the books.
Yeah.
You kept working. You stayed at the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. It's like the early 2000s. At what point did you start working for the ADM?
Okay. After my brother Pat died, he died while having a heart transplant, actually, in 2013. And that got me to thinking that I would like to try something else. So I went to work at the time it was Alaska Dispatch. And so they made me an offer and it was good.
I want to hear every detail.
Yeah.
Because I read Amanda Coyne and Tony Hopfinger's book about Vico. I think it's a very good book.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested in that publication and how it came about.
I didn't deal too much with Alice.
And Alice Rogoff was funding the Alaska Dispatch.
But Tony is the one who approached me and said, "Hey, why don't you come to work for us?" And I said, "Okay." Yeah. He had approached me, I don't know, earlier in 2013. Anyway, that's when the year I decided, okay, I want to try something different. So I became columnist for Alaska Dispatch and stayed with it when Alice bought the Anchorage Daily News. And so I wrote an opinion column as long as that lasted until 2017.
Got it. And you were immediately on the chopping block.
Yeah, because, and I certainly understood this because I was pretty well paid and
they didn't need a paid opinion columnist.
They didn't meet too. Charles Wolforth was doing it as well. And he was in Anchorage. There's certainly a lot of good reasons why they laid me off and not him. And it did bother me at first, but it was perfectly a legitimate move by the Bakeleys, I think. And, and I certainly hold no bad feelings about that at all, because it was a good thing for me to not be working for him. Yeah. And I was, let's see, that was 2017. So I'll be 72 in September. And I was close to retirement age then, but I didn't really want to retire. But I didn't want to jump, and I haven't really had a job since then. But I started this blog because
You started immediately?
No, it was a few months later. The reason I started in late 2017, I was angry. I was angry that what I routinely called the GOP tax scam of 2017 was not being adequately covered in Alaska. And now people at the Daily News and elsewhere, they were mad at me for bringing this point up, but I still think it's correct. We weren't holding our congressional members accountable on that, or Trump either. And so I started it mainly because I wanted to point out things that I thought were a real problem with that 2017 law, which included the tax that was proposed on cruise ship operations, which was not a very steep tax, but our delegation went there to oppose this. So that was one of the small revenue measures included in that bill that it took out. And as a favor to the cruise industry, these are not Alaska companies. This is companies that are in the Bahamas or whatever. They're not U.S. companies even, but that's just one example, the way that the opening of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil drilling got into that bill, I thought deserved more coverage. And it was, in essence, the price for getting Lisa Murkowski to support it. So anyway, it was a bunch of things related to that bill, which I thought were not being covered. So that kind of prompted me to, and that started. And I didn't think I would stick with it, but I'll tell you what, the reason I did, because I had seen what Mike Dunleavy had said as a senator on the budget. And it bothered me that he continually talked about the need to cut the budget without saying what he wanted to cut. And I thought that point needed to be brought out into the open, because it just did not make sense to say, I want to cut the budget, but I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to cut the budget.
We now know that he wanted to cut education.
Yes. To me, it just sort of boggles my mind. And I thought that he obviously has been a popular subject on my blog for all these years now. I imagine he considers it to be unfair, but I don't. He's the governor, and I don't think he's done a very good job. And I think I've tried to be fair to him. Now, he may not like what I've done, but I've tried to be fair by dealing with facts and calling out decisions that I think were bad ones.
So
without being insulting. I've tried not to be insulting.
I have questions about your process in terms of what does a typical day, and I'm thinking about this in terms of you watched that crazy Treg Taylor meeting where he was pandering. And I guess I'm like, where did you find that?
Okay,
and how?
Because somebody said, somebody said, okay. And that was this 2-hour hearing that Peter McKinney did at Kenai.
And so you have people helping you and being like, hey, you've got to see this.
People send me things and say, hey, look at this. And
then as far as the national stuff, where do you go first?
I read the New York Times and the Washington Post. And I follow certain people on Twitter, X, and on Bluesky. And I really want to know what's happening with key Alaska issues. And I have my daily information search along those lines. And when the legislature is in session, if I have time, I really am interested in certain topics. The permanent fund is one that I'm very interested in. I am interested in education. Why we don't have a fiscal plan, that's a very big one. And other things as they come up. I don't know. I find a lot of things very interesting that the legislature deals with. And I do think some legislators are not up to speed or not up to the job. Some are. I've been really paying close attention to this for decades. And it's taken me a long time to learn a little bit. So I feel for people who are fairly new to this. It's a lot to absorb quickly, especially when there's new things coming at you all the time. I do think our legislature should be bigger. I think it should be bigger. I think there should be more money to hire professional year-round staff. And those two things are probably really unpopular ideas. If you ask,
well, I would say
Alaskans about
if you look at, and I would say if you look at us nationally, the Alaska legislature has more staff than most other state legislators have. There's legislatures where they have one staff member shared amongst multiple legislators, and we all get our own. So we are lucky in that way. But what I will say is that I don't like the part of being a legislator where I'm supposed to go to events and take photos and then post them on social media. But multiple legislators believe this job is to show up at events and get a photo taken.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's a lot of really big problems in Alaska.
Yeah.
And trying to find solutions to problems is really hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Showing up at events is stupid. It's a waste of my time.
Yeah. I agree with you. And all of that is probably has some value. But to me, that's not what being a legislator is all about.
Not at all.
And anyway, I had this problem with someone. I've been in the legislature for a long time, and he's not an expert on anything, or he hasn't led a charge on things, on anything that I know of.
Can we talk about Dan Sullivan and ADAC?
Yeah. How many billions is that?
Okay, billions of dollars going to the middle of nowhere to send 3,000 sailors in the middle of nowhere. Will it be any benefit to Alaska at all? Not at all. And you could say, oh, that's great. It's great if we have unlimited money, Senator Sullivan.
Yeah.
But if you're going to send billions out there, that's not going to Jayberry, that's not going to Wainwright, that's not going to Eielson, that's not going to Alaska.
It's a legitimate question. And anyway, but the AI thing is a real problem. Yes, it's true. There's money in this recently passed budget for Arctic infrastructure, whatever. I think it's 125 million, but it's not enough. And how do we do that? It's billions of dollars. Who is pushing for this? I imagine it's the Allied Corporation because they own this property.
Yep.
And it could be a gigantic payday for the Allied Corporation. No, this is in my mind to write about this, that he got money in the bill, but before any of that is spent, we need to know what's the cost of doing this. And I think it's got to be multiple billions. And operationally, how throughout the year, the main reason for this is to deal with summer tunneling excursions, generally, in the Bering Strait. Now, does it make sense to have ADAC year-round operation or a seasonal operation? I can't see how you would spend this money for a seasonal operation. He keeps saying this, but it needs to be picked apart. And there's obviously pushback even from the Trump administration of this, because he held up, who was it? It was a Defense Department.
Oh, yeah. He held up a nomination.
Yeah, until he talked
to non-controversial.
Yes, and he talked to, and Hegseth gave him some.
Yes, assurance.
Yes.
So let me ask about that. We're at the end of our time. But I'll just say, I assume that when you were working as a reporter, that you probably held your political views closer to your chest.
I did write a column, but you're not free to do anything you want when you're working for someone else. The organization will have opinions about, look, I don't want you to deal with this topic. And I got feedback along that. Do
you remember any of the topics that you wanted to deal with that you weren't supposed to?
And on more than one occasion, I was told to not write about the legislature so much and write about things in Fairbanks. Okay, all right, I did. But when you're an organization and you have an employee, you're just simply not free to do whatever you want. I never had to twist anything, ever. I would never felt the pressure to twist anything to conform to the opinions of my bosses. So I probably censored myself, knowing what their opinions were and what I thought their limits were. It is freer than having a boss. And I really go out of my way to try to be, fair is the wrong word. I try to be honest about things. And if I make a mistake, I really try to correct it. I think it's really important to do that. Well, Andrew, I'll just close this by saying we really need a better way in Alaska to communicate what key issues are happening, what the facts are, and what people ought to know. And we suffer from a really low level of engagement and information about this. We've let this debate on too many things be oversimplified to a dangerous degree. If you look at the recent arguments about education, boiled down by the governor and by his supporters, just, it's all about money, but I want policy. Obviously, that's not the situation we're facing. Everyone wants good education policies. And for him to say that the legislature is against good education policies is a distortion, because the legislature is against some of his specific proposals, most of which I think have been discussed in detail and their weaknesses have been exposed. For instance, the idea of reducing the power of local school boards to create charter schools, reducing it in the sense of taking that out of their hands to a degree, and the temporary bonuses to school teachers, which I think is driven largely by the desire not to give permanent raises to teachers, thinking perhaps that somehow helps the NEA, which is his he
Enemy.
he presents that as the enemy, which it's not. Anyway, I'm not sure how we get to a better discussion of these things, but we certainly do need it. And it can start by calling out political leaders who engage in distortion, who lie about things, put it that way.
Hey, I have 3 questions to end.
Yeah, okay.
Was Terrence your identical twin?
Yeah, I'm still getting people still
Really?
asking him. Although he was very well known here and he had many thousands of students.
So people still confuse you for him.
Yes, they do occasionally. And I miss him, of course, every day.
That's what I was going to say. When you said that when Pat died, that you really thought, what am I doing? But I would feel like when you lost Terrence, that you would have a similar.
It was a huge blow, put it that way. Yeah.
I had Jane Amdick on. She had an identical twin sister who she lost.
Yeah.
It's hard for people who don't have an identical twin to know what that feels like to have an identical twin.
Yeah. I still feel his presence with me, to tell you the truth. In that I know exactly what he would say about something. It's an odd thing because we had many of the same interests. Mm-hmm. We were not identical people. We were identical twins. We had many of the same interests, but I really knew how he thought and he knew how I thought. And I really miss his advice. No, that's not right. That's not correct. It's an empty spot in your heart.
Last question is, do you have a book to recommend?
A book?
Yeah. And I guess, do you read books? The thing is, I get so wrapped up in the news of the day. Yeah, I don't read as many books as I used to.
Yeah, I just finished this new biography of Mark Twain, which I thought was pretty good. I'd recommend that.
I know who you're talking about because I heard an interview with him.
Ron Chernow, I think.
Oh, yeah. Ron Chernow.
Yeah.
Who had done Hamilton.
Yeah. I don't think it's a great biography, but it was enjoyable. And Mark Twain's one of my heroes.
My understanding is that was not a hagiography, that he was going to tell Mark Twain as a real person who made his children angry or...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. And that, to me, that's one of the weaknesses of this book, to tell you the truth, in that he doesn't spend enough time analyzing his written works or appreciating his written works. He does spend a great deal of time on the dysfunction with his family, with his daughters in particular. And far too much time, I think, in the latter stages of his life, after one of his daughters had died, Twain had what sure seems even today like an unhealthy relationship, not physical, but
emotional,
social and emotional relationship with young girls. And I think it's fine for him to deal with that. But it
seemed like it was too much.
He has a great deal about
It's interesting. It feels like that what Ron Chernow was trying to do is, I'm going to write a Mark Twain biography unlike any other, like really trying to set it up.
I guess I think that's it. Yeah. That probably, but I mean, the book is certainly worth reading. It's good. He's a good author. And it does make me want to read some more of Twain's works again.
Dermot Cole, thanks so much for being on the show.
Andrew, this was fun. Thank you.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akhlight.gov or call 907-269-0123.